Chapter 52, The Deadly Swordsman. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. Zhang Yuochen and the Ninth Commandery Princess had just arrived at the Yellow Fighting Palace when a deafening cry emanated from the Warfare Palace. After the sound, a headless body was carried out by other people. Zhang Yuochen glanced at the body, and asked the housekeeper of the Yellow Fighting Palace, "Sir, what happened?" The housekeeper was very thin, looking around 30 years old as he answered, "Today, a deadly swordsman came to the Yellow Fighting Palace. All the warriors who fought against him were decapitated by him." That was the 8th. The Ninth Commandery Princess's expression changed slightly when she added, "Just using a sword?" The housekeeper nodded and continued, "He is so excellent. I've been here for 10 years, and I've never seen a young man whose sword technique is so brutal, merciless, and cold. He strikes as fast as lightning. How horrible it is." "Are you able to guess how old he is?" The Ninth Commandery Princess answered, "The person who can kill the warriors at the completion of the Yellow Realm with one slash must be 18 or 19 years old at the least." The housekeeper shook his head and murmured, "His name is Le and he is just 15 years old." The Ninth Commandery Princess was suddenly shocked. 15 years old? Let me have a look. Zhang Yuochen walked into the Yellow Fighting Palace with his hands behind his back. At that moment, a sallow and emaciated boy stood inside the Colosseum. He looked 14 or 15, dressed in tattered clothes, and held a rusty sword stained by dripping blood. He held himself straight like a sculpture, but his gaze betrayed fear and murderous feeling. Having continuously killed 8 warriors, he had momentum climb to the peak. No one dared to get into the Colosseum under the pressure of his murderous feeling. Zhang Yuochen stared at the boy in the center of the Colosseum. As a young swordsman, he distinctly felt the sword comprehension and the murderous feeling of the boy. Zhang Yuochen nodded and said, "He is gifted." His sword breath followed the heart. The realm of his sword comprehension, which is rich in murderous intent, has reached the intermediate stage of the following the mind. The Ninth Commandery Princess also looked at the boy and said, "He doesn't look like a pure Terran, but a magic wolf half-human of the half-human clan." Zhang Yuochen said, "That's right. He is a magic wolf half-human. See, his eyes is blood red, just the same as the wolves." At this moment, a cold laughter echoed from the distance and said, "Yuochen, you've been 3 years gone. I really miss you." Zhang Yuochen looked towards the direction of the laughter. He spotted a handsome man with a pale complexion standing in the grandstand and smiling at him. He also saw another acquaintance, Lin Ningshan. Lin Ningshan was wearing a white chiffon shirt with a sachet and a jade pendant on her waist. She looked taller with a graceful body, snow-white skin and long black hair hung over her waist. Lin Ningshan was clearly extremely beautiful. She had blackened eyebrows, big blinking eyes, ruby lips, a slender neck, a stiff bosom and straight legs. She was as perfect as a world beauty walking out of a scroll. "Cousin, don't you even know me?" Lin Cheniu stared at Zhang Yuochen with a coquettish and evil smile. Zhang Yuochen had already known who he was after seeing Lin Ningshan. Since he greeted forwardly, Zhang Yuochen decided to behave himself decently and to them, saying, "Long time no see. I didn't expect to meet you at here." The Ninth Commandery Princess whispered, "Yuochen, don't get too close to Lin Cheniu. He behaves badly and is sinister and crafty. It is not suitable to make friends with him." Ninth Commandery Princess's voice was very small but was still heard by Lin Cheniu. Lin Cheniu's ears moved slightly with his eyes gleaming, and said, Ninth Commandery Princess, you speak ill of me in front of me. How terrible. Is this the decorum of the royal family?" The Ninth Commandery Princess retreated with a complex look on her face and a muffled sound in her throat when she heard the cold hum from Lin Cheniu. She stopped with a trace of blood spilling out of her mouth. She had suffered internal injuries. Zhang Yuochen thought, "What a great cultivation he has. It must have reached the advanced stage of the Black Realm or stronger." In each realm, there were 7 more stages: the initial stage, the middle stage, the advanced stage, the dawn state, the medium state, the final state and finally, the completion. A warrior who had reached the Black Realm was a master of martial arts. If he joined the army, he would be a general at least. Of course, in the Black Realm, Every advancement to a higher small realm grew more difficult. Lin Shenyu deserved to be considered the first genius of Lin family. He had reached such an unfathomable realm at just 20 years old. Finally, the 9th challenger entered the Colosseum to challenge the deadly swordsman. It was known that the former challengers were killed by the deadly swordsman. The person who still dared to challenge him was clearly very brave. Deadly swordsman, I, Han Fu, have come to challenge you. Han Fu stood in front of him with an axe in one hand. Every warrior was looking at the Colosseum. The challenger of the 9th battle was Han Fu, who was a warrior of yellow board. Since he had fought against Han Fu, Zhang Yuochen knew about his ability. The 9th commandery princess had wiped away the bloodstain, distanced herself from Lin Shenyu, stared at the Colosseum, and said, I'm unable to predict how many swords Han Fu can catch. Zhang Yuochen answered, if Han Fu can catch his first sword, he can keep his life. Otherwise, he might die. How can only one sword have the potential to kill Han Fu? That's impossible. The 9th commandery princess said. Zhang Yuochen was silent as he gazed at the Colosseum. Puff! In an instant, Han Fu's head had flown out of the Colosseum, falling to the ground like a ball. In the 9th battle, the deadly swordsman had won. After a short silence, the entire warfare palace broke out loudly in shouts and exclamations. Only a single sword. I didn't even see his attack clearly and only perceived a shadow of that strike. What class of sword technique did he use? It was far too fast to see how he employed the sword. In the last month, even the 9th prince, a genius, needed more than 80 attacks to defeat Han Fu in a match. Will another talented young warrior be rising? The 9th commandery princess was also startled and asked, Yuochen, did you see his attack? Zhang Yuochen laughed and said, his action is quite fast, but it contains a fatal flaw. The others won't notice it. But I have. Of course. The world of martial arts can defeat everything but speed. His speed can cover the flaw to an extent. If it was a month ago, the result would be hard to predict. But now, Zhang Yuochen didn't continue speaking and stared at the Colosseum. Finally, the deadly swordsman began the 10th battle. The next person who fought against him was Su Heng, an elderly man. Sorrowfully, Su Heng also died, becoming a headless corpse and lying in a pool of blood. He must be so invincible. He had won 10 rounds in a row. Every single match was settled only with one blade. Even no exception for a warrior of yellow board. The young swordsman showed a more incredible talent than the one the 9th prince showed within the last month. The principal of the Yellow Fighting Palace quickly provided an assessment of his performance. He was ranked 6th on the yellow board. The reason why he was only 6th was that nobody could force him to try his best. If he showed his complete might, his rank would be higher. The deadly swordsman still looked cold and heartless. He departed from the Colosseum carrying his macabre sword. Completely emotionless. He had not returned to a mild countenance until he saw Lin Ningshan. He felt his heart's beat increase, quickly averted his eyes, and said, Miss Lin, I kept my word and won 10 matches without any losses. Lin Ningshan smiled sweetly, touching Le's shoulder softly as she said, Le, as your talent is so strong that many great powers would like to draw you over to their side. Why do you choose to remain in our family as a servant? Le bit his lip lightly, stared at her beautiful face and said, I'm willing to stand by you forever and remain content. In his view, the girl in front of him was so perfect and holy that it was satisfying to stay with her. Lin Ningshan nodded and smiled, but there was contempt in her eyes. Lin Ningshan looked arrogantly at Zhang Yuochen and said, Cousin, you practice the sword as well. If you fought against Le, how many attacks could you receive? Zhang Yuochen looked at Le, thought a moment and said indifferently, since he is so willing to protect you, you should treasure him. After saying that, Zhang Yuochen headed for the Colosseum and didn't bother Lin Ningshan anymore. When she saw Zhang Yuochen enter the Colosseum, Lin Ningshan thought, he has become a warrior of yellow board. Why did he walk into the Colosseum? Did he? This is fun. Lin Shenyu smiled with his eyes betraying murderous intent. Maybe he found it humorous that Zhang Yuochen could be slain inside the Colosseum. Lin Shenyu waved to Le and said, Le, come here. Master, what do you want me to do? Le said. Lin Shenyu laughed, Look carefully. The youth inside the Colosseum is a pursuer of Ningshan. You will possibly kill him later. Are you sure about this? In my eyes, there are two kinds of people, the living and the dead. Either he dies or I die. Le stared at the Colosseum sharply, his gaze as sharp as a sword.